Hello my honeys, welcome to today's video. We are talking about hunger and fullness. Honey, this is my jam. Inside my Slim on Starch program, we have we got cats flying around this kitchen. Woo! In my Slim on Starch program, we have an entire week, an entire module that is dedicated to hunger and fullness. This is my stuff. I love to talk about hunger and fullness, and so that's exactly what we are going to do today. Today, we're going to be talking about why it is that it is so difficult for you to get a read on your hunger and fullness. And by the way, if you like this video and you really want to do a deep dive with me personally about your hunger and fullness because it's something that you're struggling with, then go to healthyhunnies.org and apply to work with me. Also, make sure you hit subscribe. I upload a new video every Wednesday and every Saturday. So in today's video, we are talking about why is my hunger and fullness so hard to get a grip on? It looks like everybody else is reading their hunger and their fullness no problem, but I'm like some freak who can't figure it out. I don't know when I'm hungry. I don't know when I'm full. I'm either wicked hungry or I'm so stuffed, I feel like I'm gonna be sick. Does this sound familiar? Let's talk about why this is happening. I think it's important for you to understand why it's happening and to understand that there's absolutely nothing wrong with you and there's a reason why you're experiencing this. And then maybe in my next video, if you give this video a thumbs up, then I'll make my next video a video where we talk about exactly what you can do so that you can start to read your hunger and your fullness cues better. Let's get into the reasons why you might have trouble deciding if you're hungry or full and reading your hunger and your fullness cues and why this is all just so confusing. The first reason is that you are searching for the magical hunger and fullness light bulb. You're on this search for the fullness light bulb. You hear people say, eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. It's easy. And it makes you believe that fullness is literally this light switch that you turn on and you turn off. You're hungry when you come to the table and the fullness light switch is off. And then when you leave the table, you've flipped that hunger and fullness light switch back on, you feel full, you're good to go. It doesn't work like that. It's not that you're either hungry or you're full. These are not mutually exclusive. You're not one or the other. It's not two sides of a coin. Hunger and fullness is a spectrum. And it's important for us to appreciate that we want to be in that gray area between wicked hungry and super full. We want to live on that spectrum. What I often find with the people that come to my program and people that have gotten themselves into dieting and have totally become out of tune with their hunger and their fullness cues is that they don't live on the spectrum, they live on the two sides of the coin. And they're flipping that coin back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between starvation and way overeating, and they're not living in that gray area. But that's what we want to do. So mistake number one is that you're thinking that it's two sides of a coin and you're supposed to either be hungry or full. You check off one of those boxes and that's that. And I can understand why it is that you believe that, because you hear it put so simply: eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full, as if those are the only two options. But if we've learned anything as time goes on, is that we can't just put our identity or our feelings into a checkbox. You know how when you get those forms and you have to fill out your demographics and it says white, black, Asian, Hispanic, and nowadays we're like, why are we doing this? We can't just put ourselves into this box. And as interracial marriages become more mainstream, you can't just check off that box. That's what's going on with hunger and fullness. It's the same exact thing. It's not like you sit down at the table and you get the bill and it says hungry or full and you check off one or the other. This is a spectrum. So that's reason number one, is that you're mistakenly believing that you're either supposed to be hungry or you're full and there is no in between. The reality is that there is an in between, and we're actually supposed to spend the majority of our time floating in the in between and living in that gray area as opposed to being on either of the extremities. So this is why in my program we have this hunger and fullness scale that we look at, and it has different numbers, and different numbers associate different feelings and different levels of hunger and fullness. It's so important for us to appreciate that so that we don't beat ourselves up, because when we finish eating, we don't have that light bulb moment. That light bulb moment doesn't doesn't really happen for anybody, and we're supposed to be on this spectrum. Reason number 2 why you're having so much trouble reading your hunger and your fullness cues is because you're waiting way too long to actually start eating. What I often find is that individuals that struggle with overeating have waited way too long to start their meal, and by the time that they start their meal, they are absolutely ravenous for food. And they said, well, I didn't feel hunger until now. And their stomach is like growling and they're feeling shaky and they really have very low blood sugar. And I go, well, the reality is that you were probably genuinely hungry about an hour or 2 before that, but you've trained yourself through dieting or intermittent fasting or counting calories, whatever it is, to not eat at certain times and to actually disregard your hunger. So you're probably disregarding true biological hunger, waiting way too long to eat. And here's what happens when you wait way too long to eat. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that we have the same brain that we had when we were cavemen 100,000 years ago. Our brain really has not changed that much. At the end of the day, we're just animals. And we still have the brain that we had 100,000 years ago. So what this means is that we are accustomed to look out for famine, right, Beer? What I was saying is that we are designed by nature to make sure that we don't starve to death. And the way to do this is to be on super high alert for a famine, because in our natural history, periods of famine were pretty common. So we have brains that are designed to be on very high alert in case a famine comes along. What does this mean? It means that if we start to get pretty hungry, our brain's gonna say, uh-oh, famine. There's a famine coming. So if you let yourself get too hungry and you wait too long to eat, well, now your brain thinks that there is a famine. Your lizard brain now thinks that there's a famine. So what's it gonna do in response to this? Well, it's gonna wanna keep you alive. So the second you put something in your mouth, it's gonna say, oh, thank God, Stacy, or whatever your name is. Stacy, okay, listen, Stacy, a few minutes ago, it became pretty clear that we're in the midst of a famine right now. So now that you have your hands on some food, you better eat. Hunger and fullness cues, throw them out the window. Those aren't gonna serve you in a famine when there's no food around. I'm not gonna let you feel full. We need to pack in as much food as we can right now. That's what your brain says to you when you wait too long to eat. And this is why we tend to overeat if we haven't eaten in a very long time. Reason number 3 why you're probably having trouble reading your hunger and fullness cues is because you're not eating the right foods. And it's a charged word to use right and wrong when it comes to food, but whatever. I think that you will get the point that I'm getting at here when I explain myself. So based on how many calories a food has, that is how much dopamine we're going to release. The more calories a food has, the more dopamine we release, and the less calories a food has, the less dopamine that we release. So more calories means more dopamine. Now, we now have foods that have an unnatural amount of calories in them. Back in the day when we were cavemen, the most calorically dense thing we ever really got our hands on was meat, which was very, very few and far between. But for the most part, we were eating fruits and vegetables, which are 200, 300, 400 calories per pound. Tubers would get you up to about 400 calories per pound. So for the most part, we really did not eat meat much. Our ancestors, only every once in a while, we would get a little bit of meat. For the most part, the majority of our diet was a plant-based diet. So the majority of our calories were around the calorie density of 200, 300, 400 calories. So we were used to an amount of dopamine that was correlated to 200, 300, 400 calories, calorie density wise. Well, now we're eating things that are 1,500, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 calories per pound. And our brain is really only designed to handle things that are 300 to 600 calories per pound. So you can imagine that the amount of dopamine that we release from these foods that are the wrong foods, unnatural foods, let's say, is gonna be berserk. It's gonna be a ridiculous amount of dopamine. Dopamine is the motivation chemical, and it's gonna override any other signals that our body is giving us. So there are certain drugs that will release a ton of dopamine, and people that are addicted to drugs, they'll have no money in their bank account, they'll have ruined all of their relationships, their body is deteriorating. But that dopamine, because that dopamine is so high, they're gonna keep using. It's the same thing with food, that you have that signal of, oh my God, my stomach is so full and I literally cannot stop eating. It's because the dopamine that you're releasing is so high, similar to that of a drug addict. And I know that sounds crazy, but this is true. Processed food is a drug that's killing so many people in today's modern world. And we don't realize that, but as I work with more and more people, it just becomes more apparent to me how much of a drug processed food is, and it can take over lives. As people get into binge eating, they think something's wrong with them, and then their cholesterol goes up, their arteries are clogged, they have a heart attack, and then they're right back eating the cheeseburgers the next day. It's not because these people have no willpower and no discipline. It's because processed food has a drug-like effect on our bodies. And long story short, in regards to hunger and fullness, is that it causes us to override our hunger and our fullness cues. Reason number 4 is that you are stuck in the binge restrict cycle. The binge restrict cycle is exactly that, a cycle. And so what happens is somebody will binge eat, and then they'll feel super guilty, they'll feel yucky, they'll feel like they have no willpower, and they'll say, you know what, okay, oh my God, I'm never doing that again. I'm gonna be so good. Like starting tomorrow, I'm gonna be perfect. Absolutely no junk food. I'm not going over my calories, whatever rules they've made for themselves. So the next day happens and they're like, all right, I'm perfect. All right, okay, I'm making my tiny little breakfast. And they start to get a little bit hungry. And then lunch rolls around. Oh my gosh, I'm like still kind of full from yesterday, so I'm just gonna have like this tiny little thing. I might even skip lunch because I'm just so full from yesterday and I had so many calories. Like I need to go to the gym, oh my God. So then they don't eat lunch. Dinner comes around and they say, honestly, like I might even skip dinner because I had so many calories yesterday. So, okay, whatever. you know what? I'm just gonna go to sleep. I'm gonna go to sleep and I'll be okay. And I'm back on track tomorrow, did well today. So then the next day comes. Homegirl ate one tiny meal for breakfast yesterday. Homegirl is gonna be hungry. So what's gonna happen? Remember we talked about earlier, that primal brain, that lizard brain is gonna say, oh my God, there's a famine, you gotta eat. So then homegirl is gonna binge. And then she's gonna feel guilty, and then she's gonna restrict. And then she's gonna get really hungry, and then she's gonna binge. Then she's gonna feel guilty, then she's gonna restrict. So that's where the binge restrict cycle comes from. What does this have to do with hunger and fullness cues? It doesn't allow you to be on that spectrum that we talked about earlier. Remember we talked about the spectrum of hunger and fullness and how we don't want to be on either side of the coin, so to speak, but we want to be on the spectrum? Well, when you're stuck in that binge restrict cycle, you can't even get yourself into the spectrum because you're just on both sides of that coin. So what's the answer here? I'm gonna make another video to talk about exactly what it is to do, but I hope that helps you understand why you're having so much trouble listening to your hunger and fullness cues if you are stuck within a binge restrict cycle. And then reason number 5 why you're having so much trouble listening to your hunger and your fullness cues is because food is being used for something outside of nourishment. Food is here to be fuel. It is here to nourish us. It is here to allow us to live a full life. A lot of people will use food in an attempt to solve problems that food cannot solve. Food will not study for your exam for you. Food will not keep your husband from cheating on you. Food will not solve whatever the problem is at work. Food is not going to pay your bills for you. And we often use food as a way to numb all of those things that I just talked about. And it's a short-term fix to a problem that is only going to worsen the more we put it off. So when you're experiencing this stress or this need for some emotional comfort, we have to step back and say, what is the problem here? Can I take an action that would solve the problem? If I can, then I'm going to take that action. If there's absolutely nothing that I can do to alleviate this problem, and it's just sort of the situation at hand, for example, the passing of a loved one or the passing of a pet, there's no action that you can take to solve that problem. It's an awful, awful part of life that is part of the human experience. So what you can do in that situation is practice another form of self-regulation that's going to allow you to cope with those feelings. Whatever the problem is, the answer is not in the fridge, and food is not going to solve any problem except for hunger. So if hunger is not the problem, then food is not the solution. And when we use food as an attempt to numb out or to solve problems that food cannot solve, then we are going to completely disregard our hunger and our fullness cues. So if you honeys want part 2 to this video where I can tell you exactly what you can do, maybe some actionable steps in order to better tune in to your hunger and your fullness, I am more than happy to do that. Just leave a thumbs up so that way I know that you want this video. If you are still watching, then say white, because I'm wearing white in my all white house in my all white kitchen. So say white if you're still watching this video, and I will know that you're an OG honey. I love you, and I'll see you in my next one. Woo!